Still have folks popping into the waiting room and coming and joining us. We'll go ahead and get started though, and hopefully my Empower staff can help me keep an eye on that waiting room, make sure we get folks moving. My name is Sarah Owsley. I'm the Advocacy Director at Empower Missouri. Welcome to our February Friday Forum with a really exciting and important topic. Today we're going to talk about raise the age, and not just in the way of like raise the age has framed a really specific policy point, but also how youth in the justice system, have different needs and different experiences, and how we can best respond to that for folks across Missouri and really across the country. We are really excited to be welcomed today or joined today by Jennifer Peacock, the Policy Director at the Michigan Youth Center for Justice, and then Gwen Smith, our Criminal Justice Policy Manager, is going to give an overview about where Missouri laws sit, how our Raise the Age policy that we have implemented has been going in Missouri, and kind of where we're going from there. So very exciting, great day today. Lots of fun things to talk about. Thank you all for joining us. I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer Peacock, the Policy Director at the Michigan Youth Center for Justice. She's agreed to join us today and talk about her experience in Michigan, where they are with their Raise the Age changes that they're looking for, and also the other work that they do there for youth in Michigan. She received her degree in Cultural and Global Studies as a Ronald E. McNair Scholar in 2018 from Central Michigan University, and then a master's degree at the American University studying international peace and conflict resolution, while a 2018-19 Newman's Own Foundation Fellow. She began her career at the Aspen Institute's Center for Native American Youth in Washington, D.C. Her national portfolio of work spans multiple focus areas, including foster care, civic engagement, climate programming. In her role then, Jennifer engaged Indigenous youth across the nation while providing culturally grounded initiatives. She believes her most important role in life is to support the vision youth have for their life, which is just an excellent mission, Jen. We are so glad to have you with us today.
Yeah, no, thank you for inviting MCYJ. I really appreciate it. Hi, everyone. Like Sarah mentioned, I'm Jen Peacock. I'm with MCYJ. We're based in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and we do statewide advocacy on the juvenile justice system, but we also are really fortunate to work with local counties on their efforts to kind of progress their own juvenile justice reform efforts. And so our vision and mission is pretty clear. We just want policies and practices that protect our young ones, but also ensure they can achieve their full potential. Today, I'm going to kind of talk about Raise the Age legislation's journey, because it was a long one, and also pretty broadly, but I also want to highlight that, all of the work I'm going to profile today, it did not happen alone. We were very fortunate to have so many other organizations and both champions in the system and outside of the system who really helped move this work forward. And so we can go to the next slide, if that's okay. Or do I have power? Okay, thank you. So for context, I just wanted to give you the Michigan kind of landscape. So unsurprisingly, Michigan joined in on that 1990s tough on youth crime, super predator narrative that was really intense and pretty rampant all across the country. The state passed really harsh laws that funneled thousands of young people under 18 into the adult criminal justice system. And so this campaign was really meant to shift into kind of a smart on crime mentality, I guess you could call it. So how can we handle these challenges in a smart way versus this very punitive putting young people in adult facilities? And at the time that this legislation actually passed, we were one of only 4 states remaining that kids at 17 were automatically considered for adult offenses. So it was a pretty significant landscape for a 17-year-old to be in, where it was kind of an automatic funneling, whereas other states it may vary, and if it's at a judge or prosecutor's kind of discretion. And just for folks who aren't familiar with Michigan system, It's very decentralized in all aspects. So we call it justice by geography, where we know young people are coming into the juvenile justice system and experiencing it completely different. So it varies by county, by resources, by budget, everything from the quality of their defense attorney to if they experience juvenile court debt. So that's kind of another challenging landscape for us in particular. And at the time that we were kind of moving on this legislation, we had a really great partner who was able to fund a public opinion poll that did show in 2015, 64% of Michigan citizens believe that youth under 18 should not be held in adult prisons or jail. So that's kind of where we were politically, but also kind of locally. You can go to the next, thank you. And so this is kind of a high level, just really quick snapshot, because you all know bills can just get really long. So I wasn't gonna put you all through that. So our legislation on raise the age did a couple of things. So it increased the juvenile court jurisdiction to 18 years old from 17 and required youth to be kept separate from adults. So that includes being transported or being in the same building. They can't, I even believe in the bill, there's some language about if they can hear or be seen by adults. It's a pretty significant piece of legislation. It established funding for 17-year-olds to access services available in the juvenile system, and then it created a raise the age fund within the state treasury. And we'll kind of talk about the funding structure in a little bit because we're hoping to kind of mix it up, which is good. And so the legislation was finally passed in 2019 on October 31st, and it went into effect October 1st, 2021. But the note at the bottom shows this really started in the early 2013, 2014. So it was a pretty significant long game. And we can jump. Thank you. So I just kind of wanted to highlight, I think this work, and any of us who care about kind of criminal justice work, we know that the narrative, there's some significant challenges. And for the conversation today, I really wanted to talk about the narrative change work that had to happen. And so there were some pretty significant philosophical arguments about who this system is for. So we had some folks saying this system should be catered and built for young kids, not a 17-year-old with a 9-year-old. I also don't know truly how I feel that we're comfortable having a 9-year-old in the system, but again, that's a philosophical narrative mentality that we were facing. But we kind of knew that to kind of tackle that key point that kept coming up was that these 17-year-olds are interacting every other system in their life as a minor, whether it's child welfare, their school system, even access to mental health treatment, all are different because it's a 17-year-old, not an 18-year-old. And so we really kind of had to parse out, well, if you're putting 17-year-olds in an adult facility, what resources do they have access to now? Because now that they're in an adult facility, they probably aren't allowed to have the same treatment as a minor. And so we're actually cutting potential resources off to our young people. And so how do you kind of tackle this idea of what this justice system is actually for? And then another kind of a key bump was the narrative around cost. So there was all the hubbubaloo about this is going to just skyrocket the budget, overwhelm the courts. Our data and research showed that in Michigan at the time, cases were decreasing, and we found caseloads as a whole were just declining. And at the time of the legislation, one of Michigan state-run facilities closed due to empty beds. So that was kind of an automatic, well, there's a point. And then data access. I think a lot of us can relate. If you're particularly passionate about juvenile justice, you're engaging with young people, so data is pretty significantly challenging to get. And then again, that decentralized system in Michigan, there's no overarching data collection, right? I could not tell you how many young people are currently in the juvenile justice system and for what. We can get snapshots, we can work with counties, but because it's so decentralized, there's no key through line of what we're collecting, right? And so we used a mix of kind of national data on the impacts of youth being in the adult system, and then we were able to merge it with the Michigan-specific data to tell this really broader, rich story about the negative implications of putting 17-year-olds in adult facilities. And so we worked with multiple partners to track down that data. Some things had to be FOIA'd. And then I did put a report here, which you can access also on our website, that kind of most of the data I'm going to be sharing with you today, it comes from this report that was commissioned leading up to the bill legislation to really get a deeper access of, well, what would this cost and what does this look like? So if you're kind of seeking reports and more data on that, that's a really great resource. You can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. And so I know this is like a lot of data and I apologize, but I wanted to show how we were able to frame these kind of core buckets of data and how hopefully maybe this may be of help as folks of some of you may be on the ground trying to move some things. How do we kind of build a story that makes it bipartisan, right? What topic points cross lines and boundaries? Because while I want to live in a world where we all can rally around our young people, sometimes we have to talk about the economic implications, the health implications, kind of recidivism rates, and racial equity, right? Those tend to be some core mobilizing themes to really help to get folks on board. And I did want to note that this data was collected between 2014, 2018. So some of these, I wanted to stay consistent with the kind of context that we were working in. So please know these numbers have probably shifted a little bit, but overall, this is kind of the theme that we were kind of going for. So the first key one, that at the time, 60% of all 17-year-olds, right, were charged with nonviolent offenses that did not include a weapon, and then a majority of those entering the system had no prior juvenile record. And so that's still consistent in the state of Michigan, where young people are facing a lot of punishment for status offenses, those of charges of that are only present because a youth is under 18. And so this kind of directly counters that narrative that we saw, right? That young people are inherently violent and these young people need to be locked away. That predator narrative directly counters that, right? We also really needed to highlight the racial equity disparity happening that still unfortunately continues in the state of Michigan, where at the time in 2012, youth of color were 23% of the population, but they were accounted for 53% of the 17-year-olds in the adult facility, which is a drastic overrepresentation. And then we also found that 60%, that 17-year-olds in adult facilities, right? It increases crime, decreases public safety. They're more likely to reoffend. So kind of the data really shows drastically that the adult system doesn't necessarily rehabilitate our young people, right? If anything, it can spark more challenges. And a piece that I'm particularly passionate about and use a lot in my conversation with legislators is focus on the family, right? The generational implications of having a young person in an adult facility and who the young people are at home, right? And so a big compelling piece is that youth in the adult system are more likely to be attacked, assaulted, or self-harm than youth in a juvenile facility. Which has a drastic impact on their family and their peers and community as a whole. 45% of young people in Michigan had already had a father in prison, and many of them are victims themselves of violence prior to entering an adult facility, with 78% having lost a friend to violence, 48% already having a family member who is killed. And so it's challenging data and it's not easy to talk about, but it highlights that these youth don't need punitive responses to what we view as most often childish juvenile behavior. It's rehabilitation, it's support, and it's this wraparound resource to really promote healing of these young people. And so our campaign and to move this along really had to hit the economic cost, that it's honestly more expensive in the long run to have a young person in an adult facility because they are more likely to reoffend and go right back in the system, which costs even more than a community-based approach or a juvenile facility, right? Our goal is always to have young people in community. We don't want the young people in facilities particularly if they're experiencing status offenses. So how can we shift our communities to that community-based care model that we know is cheaper, more effective, and more beneficial to communities? And you can go right ahead.
I will. I'm just going to exert my privilege and jump in really quick. I was very surprised by that 34% more likely. I assume that that's more likely than youth who were in a youth focused facility, right? So I just looked it up, and Michigan's overall recidivism rate, according to your government website, is 23%. So that's significantly higher than even the adults that they're serving within those same facilities. That's incredible to me. Sorry.
Yeah. No, it is. It's very glaring. You can see it when you talk about young people in facilities. You can really truly find the data. If you're able to access it, you can really see the detrimental impacts long term.
Yeah.
And so
Serving is not the right, like, I just wanted to, serving is not the right word for me to abuse, but anyway, that's
no,
the,
yeah,
I get it,
absolutely.
yeah.
Totally. And so kind of where we are today, a few years removed from Raise the Age, we still experience narrative challenges, right? Michigan is facing a current residential facility crisis that was exacerbated both by COVID-19 and long-term underinvestment, and it's a pretty nuanced challenge. And we're hearing Raise the Age come up a lot, and our data is not necessarily showing that that's the answer, but narratives are persistent. And so what I will say is that our path forward as an organization has really been shaped by the bipartisan Juvenile Justice Reform Task Force. Bipartisan, governor appointed, and they released 32 recommendations for reform, which is a monster, but we're tackling it, and that's our path forward. We have 6 priorities that we've identified with collaborators that are on your screen that are: 1, the easiest for folks to get behind, right? 2, they act as this pivotal foundation, right, of how we should engage young people, how the system can interact with young people or people in a better way, and how can we build a foundation for more progressive policies down the line. The one I'm really excited about, because it was in the governor's proposed budget this week, and so I'm glowing, is enhancing the child care fund. In Michigan, that is the primary vehicle of how our juvenile justice and child welfare facilities and resources are funded by the state. It's a reimbursement model, so counties pay up 100% up front, right, for their services, and then the state reimburses them at a flat 50%. We are proposing to increase the 75 split now, a 75% reimbursement rate for community-based incentives and care. So now it's no longer, well, you can put a kid in a community-based care in a facility at the same rate. It's more incentive to the county to put them in community-based services and alternative forms to detention. So we're very optimistic, and with that comes really practical, evidence-based practices and risk assessments and proper screening tools, right? Really setting those standards that have really been challenging because, again, that decentralized system. And as it relates to Raise the Age, to get that passed, the funding structure currently actually tracks 17-year-olds differently. So counties have to track the 17-year-olds and then crunch the numbers and then move forward with reimbursement. It's a funky math equation that's really cumbersome. And so counties don't love it. It's not necessarily the most efficient, right? So now our proposal in the child care fund legislation will actually put 17-year-olds back with their minor peers, right? So now it's one pot, and we'll kind of remove that kind of stickiness that Raise the Age created. It makes everything move a lot smoother. And again, the thought of investing more in our counties and community-based services is very, very exciting, because we know the data shows young people who stay in community, who get those community-driven resources, just tend to thrive a lot more. And then below are just kind of our other significant legislation opportunities. These are also more in detail on our website. But we want to eliminate a majority of fines and fees associated with the juvenile justice system, because young people in Michigan can walk away with tens of thousands of dollars, sometimes so much debt that it will be more money than their family will see in their lifetime. And we don't believe a young person at 14 should be carrying that burden, or at any age really, for a time when they need support, right? Not necessarily debt. Enhance traditional waivers and designations to really kind of consider the developmental maturity of our young people in court. We want to expand the Diversion Act, because similar to community-based services, pre-court diversion typically shows the best results. And we want young people to have a majority having access to it. Right now, it's pretty tricky in Michigan. A lot of offenses rule kids out from that opportunity. And so how can we divert them from the court? Not necessarily avoiding a consequence, but how can we just divert them to another path forward, right? We want to expand the Indigenous Defense Commission, which I'm really excited about, and then strengthen the Office of the Children's Ombudsman to actually include the handling and investigating of complaints at juvenile residential facilities. And so this is kind of our path forward. I know that was a lot of data and snapshots, and I hope that's helpful, just to kind of hear that the narratives we'll hear about our young people are tough. But when we actually seek out the right answers, our guts are usually right about what's effective and what isn't. And it's crafting these really rich, kind of telling, balanced stories of both data, lived experience, and I would say long-term impact, right, that this has on our communities. And so Raise the Age, I'm very proud to see how it's been moving forward. And I'm excited to see how the Child Care Fund will kind of mitigate some of those challenges. So I hope that was helpful. I really appreciate the time.
Yeah, Jen, it was super helpful. I am going to go ahead and us who were like organizing today, kind of we're not sure how to structure Q&A, whether we should hold it all till the end or we should stop and sort of, give opportunity for questions about Jen's presentation before we move, and have Gwen talk a little bit about where Missouri is. So I'm going to do that second thing. I'm going to just stop for a minute and see if there are questions specific for Jen, specific to where that is. Jen's going to hang out though. And so if there are questions, you still have questions about that after we see a presentation from Gwen Smith, our policy manager, about Missouri, you'll still have an opportunity to ask her. So you can put that into the chat box, or you are invited to come off mute and ask your question yourself if you would like to do that as well. And so now we get to sit in quiet awkwardness for a moment until somebody decides they have a question or we decide no one has questions.
I dropped my email too, if you're someone who prefers one-on-ones. I love virtual coffee chats, and I would welcome lessons learned from you all as well.
Yeah. Jen, I think that CCF, that Child Care Fund, is like such a good opportunity.
It is.
Can you give a little bit of history around that particular policy?
Well, it's been like the new proposed legislation or kind of as it stands.
It's a current thing that's happening. Is that right? Yeah. And then the proposal is just to expand it to include youth services.
Yeah, the proposal is to kind of really crack open that more funding for counties. And that has been something that I believe was around even in the Granholm administration. I think she vetoed it actually in like the early 2000s. And so it's been something a lot of folks want. And my read in Lansing is everyone is very excited about the opportunity.
Yeah, that's such a
It is.
I think that really helps some of that framing too, right, Jen? Like 17-year-olds really are still children. As a person currently parenting two 17-year-olds, they are very much still children and need a lot of assistance. So, I agree that switch doesn't exactly change on your 18th birthday, but it's very clear that 17-year-olds still really could be well served by some of these programs that are designed to serve kids.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. And we did find that 17-year-olds in the system couldn't actually access certain mental health and various resources because they were then barred out because they weren't allowed to be around minors because they were viewed as an adult. And so then you're cutting off kids from vital resources. Yeah,
that absolutely happens. Ariana, tell me first how to pronounce your name and then ask your question.
Hi, it's Ariana. Thank you. Hey, Jen, I had a question. You don't quote me on what you said exactly, but you said something about different paths instead of like hypothetically say a 17-year-old is being charged as adult. What other avenues, I guess, are there?
Oh, in context of diversion?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So Michigan has a lot of different kind of structures to diversion, right? So technically in the state, like police officers themselves, from the moment they're called, could actually do diversion work. Like they could get a call on a kid and be like, you know what, this young person doesn't need to go necessarily down to the police department. We can go back home, work with the family, provide these resources. So maybe it's some folks, view ankle monitoring as a diversion where you have to stay home and track location. Sometimes it's wraparound education kind of services. At times it's kind of mentorship programs. Or even community service. So it's pretty broad in Michigan. But by expanding the Diversion Act, we're hopeful to remove some of those barriers. Because right now, some kids get charged to go to community service, or they have to pay for diversion. And I don't believe diversion should be accessed by economic means. I think young people who are eligible should be able to. So pretty hodgepodge, if that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
How are law enforcement trained about those options?
Do
you know that answer?
I couldn't tell you.
I have full disclosure that Jen has only been in her role for a number of months, and so my badgering of questions may be unfair.
No, I don't think it's badgering, but I think again it presents that challenge that we're feeling of it's so county by county. And recently I know the governor's kind of been doing some appointment on, police officers in the context of like school resource officers, but there's not been rich conversations about how do we encourage our, because it's very minorly used. I don't even think I could tell you a county that I've heard that really has a robust diversion program.
And absolutely, like access to those programs are the key, right? If you can't get to them, it really doesn't matter what type of evidence-based information has provided and guided that program. If people are not able to get to it or don't know, or only people with means and privilege are able to get to it, it certainly doesn't serve its purpose.
Does not.
All right, good. There's a question in the chat. Mary asked, does Michigan have a minimum age at which a minor can be charged as an adult?
So right now we're working, our minimum age is pretty low. I want to say I'd have to triple check. I want to say it's 10, but that seems really low, which is upsetting. But we're working toward a 13 as a minimum age, but that is a long game goal that was identified as a juvenile task force. So we're working toward it, but right now, because of the way the court system is, a child can be waived based on a certain amount of violated like penal codes and all that good stuff. And I mean that very sarcastically. So it really, again, depends on the county and the prosecutor and the judge and where the kid is on if they're waived into the adult system.
Missouri's similarly struggling with that same type of question. Our age for certification is way too low. I think Gwen's going to probably cover that. So I'm going to go ahead and invite her to join us now. Gwen, I have your slides if you just want to sort of tell me when and how to switch them. I am happy to manage those for you.
All right, wonderful. Well, hello everybody, happy Friday. And I'm gonna provide a little bit of an overview on the history of Raise the Age in Missouri, where we've been on this issue in the last couple of years. I know there's some folks on the call that are very knowledgeable on this issue as well. So when I am done speaking, if there's any additional info to fill in that I have missed, I would welcome our audience to fill us in on that additional info. So in 2018, the Missouri legislature passed the first actual piece of Raise the Age legislation in our state. This was a concerted effort from Empower Missouri and many other advocates around the state, something that was in the works for many years before actually passing in 2018. Changed the standard age for which teenagers can be tried as an adult from 17 to 18 years old. Prior to that, in Missouri, 17-year-olds were, in the eyes of the criminal legal system, treated as adults and sentenced accordingly. However, there was a technical error in the bill that did not direct any increased funding towards the juvenile court offices to deal with the influx of new cases. And because of that, county prosecutors all over the state just simply did not follow the new law, and we're continuing to sentence 17-year-olds as adults all the way up until 2021, when that additional funding for juvenile court and detention services was approved. So this is a great example of the letter of the law and the intent of the law. It's really important to have all of those I's dotted and T's crossed, and this was an example of where that funding source was not made available. And unfortunately, I think county prosecutors were still just kind of operating as they wanted to do in this respect. Sarah, we can go to the next slide. Currently, Missouri law still allows for children as young as 12 years old who are suspected of committing a crime that's categorized as a felony offense and meets some certain requirements of the category of the crime. More serious offenses can be tried as an adult at the discretion of the court. There is some legislation that I'll talk about in just a second on the table that would increase this age to 15, but you can imagine a 12-year-old, even a 12-year-old that has done something truly terrible, probably did not get that way without a whole lot of trauma in their background. And no matter what a 12-year-old has done, they are not an adult by any means. Their brain is very far from developed. And so Empower Missouri and most other advocates on this issue really agree wholeheartedly that that minimum age at which a child can be certified as an adult needs to be raised to protect children. Sarah, we can move on to the next slide. And actually, Sarah, I think I added another slide in. I thought I was editing the current thing and I didn't. So if it's okay, I'm just going to share my screen real quick to talk real quick about juvenile life without parole sentences in Missouri and what has kind of happened in recent years on that. So let me share my screen real quick. Sorry, guys, clearly I'm doing a Friday on the fly kind of thing and editing my presentation right before going on. So thanks for bearing with me. So life without parole sentences for those that were sentenced as children is another main kind of component and advocacy area for raise the age advocates in Missouri. In 2016, the Supreme Court ruled that these sentences were unconstitutional and considered cruel and unusual punishment. But here in Missouri, as on a lot of things, we've been a little bit slow on the uptake. We did pass a bill in 2016 that would allow those sentenced to life as juveniles to petition for parole after serving 25 years. But here again is an example of a law that looks great on paper, but the reality is that just being able to petition the parole board for parole is certainly not a guarantee at release. And the Missouri parole board process and the parole review process has been subject to a lot of criticism over recent years. The MacArthur Justice Institute has been kind of leading the charge of trying to press for parole board reforms. So the upshot of this is that only about, I think a little over 20 of the 100 individuals that the sentencing structure applies to who were sentenced as children have actually been released. The parole review process has been found by a court of appeals to be unconstitutional because of the lack of information that's provided to folks, the incarcerated folks that are going up before the parole review board prior to their parole hearing. The victims' families are allowed more time to talk and not really limited in the scope of what they can say. And so the result is that a lot of folks that qualify for, should qualify for early release under the statute have not actually been seeing it because of the parole review board's decisions. Current legislation, as I mentioned, we have SB 406 currently filed in the Senate by Senator Nick Shore. This would raise the minimum age at which a child could be charged as an adult from 12 up to 15. And it would remove the offense of distribution of drugs and also the offense of manufacturing of a controlled substance, remove those offenses from the list of crimes for which a child could be certified. It would add an offense, which we're not necessarily a fan of, although the rest of the legislation looks pretty good, but it would add the offense of armed criminal action for one in which a child could be certified. It would also stipulate that correctional treatment programs for folks that are incarcerated under the age of 18 and younger would include physical separation from those that are 19 and older, and include education programs that award high school diplomas or their equivalents. So we are tracking this bill. If you are signed up for our newsletter and our updates and checking our website, you definitely won't miss any news on this bill. We will be doing a call to action and alert folks if it receives a hearing where we'll be providing supportive testimony.
Yeah, absolutely. You can always count on Gwen and our staff to keep you up to date on the bills that we're following. We have a bill tracker for all of our issue areas available on our website at empowermissouri.org, which would include all the bills that Gwen talked about today. Here's more information about the coalitions that we run. We have our Community Justice Coalition that Gwen runs. We also have a Food Security and Affordable Housing Coalition that we work directly on those issues. We send out a weekly newsletter. You'll hear from us every week about what's coming the next week in the Capitol that we know about. You'll hear about these issues when it's the right time, right? We'll send calls to action and let you know how and when to respond and the kind of conversations that we're having in Jefferson City. We have a weekly podcast as well for folks who are not readers, but do want to know. They're 20 minutes or less, just catch you up on what's happened in Jeff City and what's coming. And some of our internal conversations and thought processes. And you can learn lots more about the work that we're doing at empowermissouri.org and any upcoming events throughout the legislative session, including our upcoming election in April that we absolutely would love to see all of you there for. And we'll spend some time with our lawmakers and connect you to your lawmakers as well. And then just our final thing is please fill out our survey to help us improve, help us plan these programs and make sure we're being responsive to what you all have questions about. And I stuck it in the chat box again. Yes, there is more information about the coalitions. They are open attendance, so you can sign up and join. There's not like any requirements for membership or anything like that. So please find a coalition that you're interested in that's related to your topic areas. Join all of our coalition spaces, whatever makes sense for you and your role and your interests. We would love to have you there. They're pretty well catered to folks who are brand new, as well as folks who have been around for a long time. Our policy managers do a great job in those spaces. After that, I'm going to give you all 10 minutes back. Thank you so much for joining us. Thanks again, Jen and Gwen and all of you for your information and conversation. We really appreciate you taking some time out of your Friday to spend with us. I don't know what it looks like in your part of the state, but it is very bright and sunny out today in Kansas City. And so particularly appreciate when it's nice out and you still choose to hang out with us. We're glad to have you.
Thank you for having me. Have a good weekend, all.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jen. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Jen.
Thanks, everybody. I'm going to kick you out.